today we're exploring a seriously fascinating piece of engineering history. We're going to look at exactly how the transition from deadly manual hand cranks to the sleek push-button starters we completely take for granted actually happened. We'll dig into the brilliant logic that made it possible, and surprisingly, the tragic catalyst that sparked the entire revolution.
I want you to picture this, just for a second. Imagine walking out to your driveway tomorrow morning. You have somewhere really important to be, but before you can even get behind the steering wheel, you have to face a literal life or death reality. What if the simple act of starting your car's engine could severely injure you, or even kill you? For drivers in the early 20th century, this wasn't just some hypothetical question. It was an everyday, completely valid fear. Before 1911, just getting a car running was a physically demanding and deeply dangerous hurdle. Okay, let's dive right into this. Section 1, the deadly hand crank. So, to start an early automobile, the driver had to physically stand at the very front of the vehicle, grip this heavy iron hand crank, and manually turn it with immense force just to get the engine running. But here is exactly where the danger lived: the engine backfire. You see, if the engine's timing was even slightly off, or if the spark ignited too early, the engine would violently kick back in the opposite direction. And because the driver was gripping that heavy iron crank, the reverse force would snap the crank handle backward with absolutely terrifying speed. We aren't just talking about a minor bruise here. This incredibly violent kickback was notorious for shattering wrists, breaking thumbs, and smashing jaws. And in some truly tragic cases, the blunt force trauma was actually enough to cause fatal injuries. It was a massive, terrifying problem for the entire industry. Which brings us to Section 2, Tragedy Sparks Innovation. You know, as is the case with so many great leaps in engineering, the push for a safer alternative didn't just come from a desire for convenience. It actually came from a place of deep personal loss. Back in 1908, a really well-known automotive figure named Byron Carter, the founder of the Carter Car Automobile Company, was involved in a horrific incident. He had stopped to help a stranded motorist start a stalled car. While he was turning the handle, the engine backfired. That heavy iron hand crank violently kicked back and struck Carter, completely breaking his jaw. Devastatingly, Carter later developed complications from this severe injury and passed away. This wasn't just an anonymous statistic. His death sent absolute shockwaves through the very top of the automotive world. And here's why it hit so hard. Byron Carter happened to be a very close friend of Henry Leland, and Henry Leland was the head of the Cadillac Automobile Company. Leland was absolutely devastated by the loss of his friend to such a senseless mechanical flaw. Right then and there, Leland made a solemn vow. He decided he was going to find a way to eliminate dangerous hand cranks from Cadillac vehicles forever. He totally refused to let his company's machines take another life. But Leland wasn't an electrical engineer, so he turned to someone who was, a brilliant inventor named Charles Kettering. Section 3, Kettering's Electric Breakthrough. Now, Charles Kettering was working out of his newly formed company, Delco, the Dayton Engineering Laboratories Company, and he actually had a really specific, unique background. He had previously invented the electric motor used to operate cash registers at NCR. So he was an absolute master at making small, efficient electric motors do heavy mechanical work. Before Kettering, engineers basically assumed an electric starter motor would have to be gigantic to turn over a heavy car engine. But Kettering realized a fundamental truth. The starter doesn't need to run continuously. It just needs a massive temporary burst of power to turn the engine over, and then it can rest. Think of it using a simple engineering analogy. It's the exact difference between a marathon runner and a sprinter. A marathon runner needs sustained, continuous energy over a long period of time. But a sprinter just needs a brief, explosive burst of power to get off the starting blocks. Kettering realized the car starter didn't need to be a marathon runner at all. It just needed to be a sprinter. And this brilliantly illustrates how treating the starter like a sprinter allowed Kettering to engineer a compact, incredibly lightweight electric motor. But he didn't even stop there. He designed what we can call a dual-wheeled device. This one compact unit acted as a motor to crank the engine to life, and then, once the gasoline engine was running on its own, the device completely reversed its role. It literally acted as a generator to recharge the car's battery. It was just an astonishingly efficient use of space and weight. Let's look at Section 4, the failed Coling patent. Looking at the broader historical context, a really fun fact is that an inventor named Clyde J. Coleman actually patented an early concept for an electric vehicle starter way back in 1903. That's 8 years before Kettering. But Coleman's design suffered from exactly the problem Kettering solved. Coleman's concept was far too large, highly unreliable, and completely impractical to actually put into a production car. Kettering, on the other hand, made his 1911 design compact, lightweight, and highly practical for mass use. You know, having the idea first is one thing, but making it actually work in the real world? That is exactly why Charles F. Kettering gets the credit for the invention we use today.
Section 5. Rapid timeline to production. Once Kettering cracked the code, the speed at which this life-saving innovation moved from the laboratory to the driveway was frankly staggering. In the automotive world, bringing a brand new, totally unproven technology to the mass market usually takes years and years of refinement. But look how fast Delco and Cadillac moved. In February of 1911, Kettering successfully tested his prototype on a Cadillac test vehicle right in Detroit. Just 4 months later, in June 1911, he filed for the official U.S. patent on his electric starting motor. And by 1912, the technology was already in mass production. Going from a test prototype to rolling off the mass production line in basically a year is just a massive testament to how desperately the industry needed this fix.
So the crucial point is really in Section 6, expanding the auto market.
You see, this wasn't just a safety feature. It completely revolutionized the economics of the entire automotive industry. Because of Henry Leland's vow and Charles Kettering's sheer genius, the 1912 Cadillac Model 30 rolled off the assembly line as the world's first production car to feature the electric self-starter as standard equipment. This gave Cadillac a massive, unprecedented competitive advantage. I mean, think about it. You no longer had to risk a broken jaw to drive their car. You literally just pushed a button.
The electric starter didn't just make driving a safer alternative to hand cranks, it fundamentally eliminated the physical barriers to driving altogether. Before 1912, you really had to possess significant upper body strength to turn over a heavy automobile engine. Driving was largely restricted by sheer physical capability. By replacing brute force with an electric motor, the starter instantly made cars accessible to millions of new drivers who previously just didn't have the physical strength to crank an engine. It absolutely democratized the automobile overnight. It was a total game changer.
And that brings us to our final thought for today. The next time you sit in your car and effortlessly turn the key or push the start button, remember Byron Carter, Henry Leland, and Charles Kettering. It leaves us with a pretty fascinating question to ponder. How many other everyday push-button conveniences, the little things we interact with daily without a second thought, were actually born out of similar historical tragedies? The hidden history of engineering is honestly all around us, just waiting to be explored. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep asking questions.